From a child in foster care to a dentist with his own practice, a story of resilience, ambition, and giving back. How did he defy the odds? My guest today is Dr. Kemar Henry. I'm Archibald Gordon. This is Profile. Dr. Kemar Henry, welcome to Profile.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
It is our honor. You have a really, really interesting story, and I want to give people the Cliff Notes version before we, talk a little bit more in detail. You've been in the papers, made national headlines, I would say, about your story, which was that you were placed in foster care as a child, raised with support from the Child Protection and Family Services Agency. People would have known that as the Child Development Agency some time ago, the organization responsible for protecting children, vulnerable children, I would say, and ensuring their welfare in Jamaica. Born prematurely to a 14-year-old mother, faced early health challenges, inspired by a dental nurse at church to pursue dentistry. We'll talk a little bit about that. We've been talking about dentistry so far, and you're fascinated with that area. And earned a degree in dental hygiene, then a doctor of medical dentistry with honors. And you've been talking about your story and also just sharing, trying to inspire people who've been in your position as well. And I want to start by talking about, going from the beginning, because it said right there, you've lived quite a remarkable life, from being placed in foster care as a child to standing here today as a dentist with your own practice. Let's start at the beginning. Okay. You're placed in state care at a very early age. Can you recall what that experience was like? You were 4 months old, though.
Yes. So that experience, it was difficult growing up. I never really understood what situation I was in until probably about 4 or 5 years old. So the Child Development Agency, they used to carry me down to West Palm Court, where I could actually see all the different children who were in state care as well. And I could get to talk to them. I had this little folder that I also had at home.
This was in Portland?
Yes, in Portland. Mm-hmm. So I had that little folder that I could write in, and they would talk to me. The agents would come by my house, differently from when I would go down there. When I would go down there, they'd educate me on what situation I was in. Because at first I was thinking that my last name was Philpotts. Whenever I'd go to school, that was what I would write on my books, and all my teachers would ask me, all right, when Mrs. Philpotts comes here, she lets us know that your name is Henry, you're writing this and everything. I never understood it at that time, being so young. So when I actually got to really understand what situation I was in, then came the challenging parts, right?
And you were calling yourself Philpotts because the child of a premature baby of a 14-year-old.
Yes.
Who then, Mrs. Philpotts was the one who actually raised you.
Yes, she was.
And so Philpotts was the name that you understood yourself to be part of that family. You're talking about Mrs. Philpotts and Mr. Philpotts.
Yes.
Tell me about those people as your foster parents.
Yeah, they were my foster parents, and honestly, there are not enough positive words in the English dictionary I can use to describe both of them, honestly. They were loving, kind, caring, and I never felt like I was missing out on anything. That made my experience excellent. But when I would go to school and everything, I never really understood exactly why my extended family, I couldn't really draw the family tree, etc., like how they could. That's where the questions started coming up. Once I actually got those questions in my head, I started asking more questions, got to understand why I was going through counseling by West Palm Court, and it made everything come together more easily, and I got to actually be able to come to terms with who I was, really.
So you said Mrs. Philpotts was a huge part of this. She was a basic school teacher.
Yes.
What was she saying to you? Because clearly you understood yourself, as you're saying right now, to be loved, to be cherished. What was she and her husband, by the way, saying to you?
Well, they were letting me know that they're not blood related to me, but they let me know that I'm still a part of their family. They always left the door open for me to actually get to know my parents, family members, everybody on that side. If I wanted to, I could actually go. That's why they never literally outright adopted me. They just fostered me and gave me the option where when I actually came to understand who I was, I had the option of going to my parents, etc., if I really wanted to. And when I came to that point, I decided to actually stay. I could actually look for them and everything, but I wanted to stay with them.
Them being your blood relatives?
Them being my foster parents. I wanted to stay with them. Yes.
All right. So, and all of this, by the way, the backdrop of this is Port Antonio. So
Yes.
you're a young child in Port Antonio being raised by the Philpotts. Your mother, too young to raise you herself, but her family also around,
Yes.
and you having the opportunity to see them. But at the same time, you're growing up in circumstances in which you're seeing other children. You're at school events and you're seeing and understanding other children and seeing their blood relatives. How were you processing that?
I never really knew how to process it, But honestly, over time, I got to understand that, all right, Mrs. Philpott is not blood related to me, but she's family same ways. So I got to actually understand that, all right, the rest of my extended family, they're not coming to school and so on, but it's still all right because I'm still in a loving home and I'm not missing anything. That was what I was actually thinking. Growing up, I got to understand that as I grew up.
No, that's Mrs. Philpott, but Mr. Philpott also in the picture, or was he?
Yes, he was in the picture, but unfortunately in 2002, he actually passed away. He was bedridden most of the time, so I never really got to see him active out there working and so on, but he was still very loving whenever I'd go to school and so on, and if I would get into any scuffle or so, he would ask somebody to, walk with me home and everything. He couldn't do it, but he'd get somebody, to walk with me home, protect me and everything. So everything that he could do, he did.
Let's talk about your education journey. How did that pan out in terms of how you're performing in school? Did it affect you at all?
At first, I wasn't the high achiever, all right? At first, when I was going to school, I went to Port Antonio Infant, Port Antonio Primary, then Titchfield High School, the greatest, right? But at first, I wasn't the highest achiever at first because I was distracted. I was playing games and so on. Every time I would go home, Miss Philpott would say, all right, take up your book. Eventually, I got the message that I really and truly need to study. She always wanted to see the best for me, right? So eventually, I got on the right path. Roughly 9th grade, thereabout. Those were the times when I started to want to actually come first in my class. I never used to care about placements and so, but one of my best friends, I saw him get an award when I was in grade 8. Right, he got an award at Titchfield, and I looked at myself and I said, I want something like that as well too. Trevor and Naismith. And from there, I took it upon myself to say that, all right, I need to come first in my class, right? So I started working really hard at that time. Eventually, I got on the right path and I actually put in the work. I started getting a lot of high grades and so that I could do it.
All right, I want to talk about dentistry and how that became the actual path, but we have to take our first break. On Profile, my guest is Dr. Kemar Henry. He's a dentist, a mentor, former ward of the state. We'll be back after these messages.